I don't have a Frankenstein project to plug. I may next year or later this year, but I don't now, so I can't plug it.
Yeah, I'm surprised you don't have like Frankenstein files for
I know,
Gumshoe.
right? It's the natural next thing.
And
So
then the Mummy Manifesto, and
the
then
Mummy Manifesto
the
and
Gilman Gazette.
the Creature Codex.
Exactly. Black Clock Audio Tales, June 2019. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, featuring Ken Hite, Supplemental number 7. Brought to you by BunnySlippers.com. Check out their new Dino sound slippers. They're super cool Cthulhu plush slippers. They've got zombie slippers, animal slippers. You want to pretend you're a cheetah? They got cheetah slippers. You want to pretend you're a big fluffy bunny? They got fluffy bunny slippers. You know those cool slippers from Real Genius that Chris Knight, aka Val Kilmer, wears? Got those. You can totally dress like Chris Knight and live out your 80s fantasy with BunnySlippers.com, combined with the cool t-shirts from FoundItemClothing.com. Anyway, FoundItemClothing.com, they're pretty cool too. That's where I have all my Revenge of the Nerds and Bad News Bears t-shirts that I wear all the time. So anyway, guess what? Black Clock Audio Tales is a daily podcast where you get to hear an audiobook, one chapter at a time, short stories, folklore, mythology, and occasionally we have guests on the show. This is one of those days. Today we've got Ken Hite from Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff, and I don't know, you may also know Ken Hite from writing role-playing games if you're someone who likes The Call of Cthulhu or Dungeons and Dragons or Gumshoe or any of those cool systems that he does stuff for. I think he did some stuff for GURPS. I can't remember. I don't know Ken Hite's whole background. We're going to talk to him about Frankenstein, but I'll get him back on for either People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos or Black Clock Audio Tales to talk about his background and, you know, why he's Ken Hite, how you get to be Ken Hite. I'm going to do that one of these days. I swear. I swear. Look for our podcast wherever you look for podcasts. And, you know, give us a review on Stitcher or I don't know, that Apple one now. Which one is it? iTunes, Apple Podcasts? It's all changing up. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Super cool. People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos is edited by D.B. Spitzer. Music by Kevin MacLeod. The Chamber is the song that I use for everything nowadays. Although Facebook seems to think that if I pitch shift it down and reverse it, it's someone else's copyrighted material. So, Facebook, get your stuff together. It's causing problems. All right. So if you've, normally listen to us on Facebook, yeah, it's been weird lately. So hopefully we'll get that fixed. All right. Here's me talking to Ken Hite about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. What do people need to know about Frankenstein?
I guess the first thing that they need to know about Frankenstein is that it was written by Mary Shelley when she was barely 18 years old. Began writing it in 1816, or actually a little after 1816. Came up with the idea, according to her, and why would you doubt her, you unchivalrous monster? Basically, during a rainy summer afternoon, they can't go out and play, so her, Lord Byron, John Polidori, her husband Percy, who was not, I think, her husband quite at that moment, and Claire Claremont, who was a groupie to Byron, were all jammed up in a house in Switzerland. It's rainy, it's thundery, it's awful. A volcano has gone off on the other side of the world, ruining everything for everybody. So they start telling ghost stories, and at the end of the ghost story telling period, they say, we should write ghost stories. We're awesome. And everyone goes away and writes ghost stories, except no one else does, really. Polidori writes something that eventually becomes The Vampire. Byron writes about half of a poem and gets bored. Percy doesn't do anything. And Mary Shelley writes Frankenstein, or she writes the first bunch of observations and thoughts that eventually become the novel Frankenstein. The other thing to know is that people, jerks mostly, will try and tell you that Percy Shelley, her husband, the famous poet, actually wrote Frankenstein or actually polished the prose or actually did this or actually did that. And
Yeah.
in fact, you can look at the actual manuscript, speaking of the word actual, in the British Library, and you can see where Percy has written little marginal notes on her first draft and where she has either incorporated them or said, yeah, nice try, Percy, and left it. And so at the end of the day, maybe 10% of the words in the 1818 edition of Frankenstein are Percy's. And that's a generous guess. And it is not any part of the core concept. It might be bits of when Frankenstein is doing, the monster rather, is doing his philosophizing in the cottage when he teaches himself Enlightenment theory by reading books and sort of is thinking about the natural state of man. A little more of that is maybe Percy than Mary, but even then, it's Mary's ideology, who came out, honestly. She was the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft, who was one of the great pioneers of feminism and basically libertarian thinking in Europe, and brought a lot of that into her marriage with Percy, and that's why Percy was into her, is because she was very, very smart and very, very interesting and very, very progressive, and he was the spoiled son of a nobleman. So he went for that. So a lot of the concepts are all Mary's. Percy sort of added stuff around the edge, but really it's Mary Shelley's novel, and it basically jumpstarts or re-jumpstarts the horror genre in English, although there's other examples, before Hoffman on the Continent, etc., and whatever it was they were reading there in their villa. And it also sort of is the birth of science fiction, because quite obviously you can't have science fiction before you have the scientific understanding of the world, and then you can start riffing on it and saying, what if you could make a man without sexual reproduction? What if you could build one? What would you do? What would that mean philosophically, and what would that mean ethically? And that's, of course, the core of the story, over and above the fact that it's an awesome story about a monster that goes bananas and kills a bunch of people.
Horror, really, really gothic horror in general, I feel like when I read it, horror a lot of the time feels like it's answering philosophical questions that were just merely hypothetical. It's like, well, actually, this is what... I don't know. That's just a...
Yeah, I mean, and that's because horror literature, like all literature, it's in conversation with its times, and it's in conversation with people who create books and plays and everything else. And those people are influenced by philosophical concerns and ethical and moral concerns. So in addition to being stories about monsters or stories about insanity or stories about whatever, they are also stories about the human response to these things, and human responses are the very stuff of what you're talking about philosophy. What do we believe about a universe if the universe can produce Frankenstein's creature? What does that tell us about the universe? What are we impelled to believe? And then what are our obligations to that creature? And what if it doesn't feel the same obligation, or worse yet, feels those obligations, but only to its own kind? Because, of course, that's what Victor Frankenstein fears, is that by creating this first species, he has, ended humanity. That once the creature can reproduce, it will, wipe us from the planet because it's bigger and stronger and superior and doesn't need to eat and all the other things that it has going on.
The Franken singularity.
Right, exactly. And that's why when at the end of the section in the Shetland Islands, he doesn't build the mate for the monster. We don't have that great moment that we have from James Whale's movie, where the bride rejects Frankenstein. We have the moment where Frankenstein says, I'm going to go back on my word. I'm not doing that. I'm going to dump the body and on all the pieces into the ocean, and basically dooms himself, because that means the creature will pursue him and kill him, essentially. And you might say maybe Victor should have had a moral sense somewhere earlier in the book, but, I guess better late than never.
What do you think really informed, in your opinion, really informed what Frankenstein became? What led up to it, and, how does it really kind of influence horror and science fiction in the future, besides the obvious of, Frankenstein movies every 10 to 15 years?
Because it is the first book to present these questions both eloquently and memorably. I mean, obviously, people have talked about creating life going all the way back to ancient Greece,
Sure.
But it's the first sort of novelistic way that these questions are posed. And that, I think, is that's half of the reason that it clings on to us. The other, of course, is that it's just a really it uses a lot of really terrific gothic imagery. The yellow eye of the creature opening, the attic full of body parts, all the rest of it. And I think it did catch a break in that the movie of it, James Whale's Frankenstein, is very, very visually memorable, and it introduces so much to the mythos that is not true to the novel, but is true to our imagined Frankenstein. I mean, right now, if you were just sitting there thinking of Frankenstein, you were thinking of Boris Karloff in that original makeup with the bolts in his neck. You're thinking of a brute that doesn't speak but responds to treatment, that is sort of a Skinnerian human, put in a box and abused by his creator. Not the sort of Byronic young Werther sort of hero that the Frankenstein creature is. That he is born as a fully functioning, thinking, speaking being who is forced to educate himself, literally like one of the children of nature in a Rousseau almost state of nature, and then reasons out. Turns out Mary Shelley was right about politics. What are the odds? Not the first or the last time that will happen in science fiction, obviously. But that the sort of the combination of Mary Shelley's real philosophical grappling with the question and her imagery tied to James Whale's brilliant, if variant interpretation of the text. I think that really gives Frankenstein the juice that he has to keep going. I think without that movie, or if that first movie hadn't been very good, we would still read Frankenstein. And I think certainly as people become once more aware, women invented horror, maybe we should pay attention to women writing. Mary Shelley would have had a resurgence in the 70s, kind of like she did anyway. Yeah. Frankenstein, I think, would not be legendary in the same way that Dracula is legendary without that movie. Yeah. And I think that movie just did so much to, and I'm trying to resist making electrical puns here, but so much to supercharge that mythology, that so much of what we think of as Frankenstein is it's actually a physical effort, I think, certainly for someone my age, to pick yourself up out of that Frankenstein and put yourself down in Mary Shelley's original Frankenstein, the self-educated philosopher who argues philosophy, and because of a moral sense decides he's going to murder Elizabeth and Henry and everybody else that he murders over the course of the book. So he argues himself into becoming this object of vengeance and purported justice in a way that the movie Frankenstein is actually kind of more relatable, because it's just like, well, he doesn't know any better. Igor was mean to him, and he had an anomalous brain. Poor guy. And of course, Karloff did such a great job bringing that inarticulate character to life in both of the movies, that I think that our sympathetic energies are so much more engaged by that Frankenstein than by the Frankenstein of the novel. I know that in the novel, when I read it, it's like two guys on the internet. You just want to put them both in a boat and send them to the North Pole. They're super annoying. And again, that's Mary Shelley having grown up with her dad and marrying Percy. So that was how people she knew talked, was in these sort of full paragraphs.
We've talked about Dracula in the past, and now we're talking Frankenstein. And Frankenstein, Dracula, two major monsters in literature and, early cinema. Why do you think that Dracula's more prominent than Frankenstein, given the literature?
I mean, I think that a lot of it is that there is a overt sexual component to Dracula that is covert. And in movie, Frankenstein is not there at all. Yeah. And in the novel, Frankenstein has sort of a weird sexual relationship, sort of an intellectually sexual relationship with Victor. The creature does. I can't keep calling him Frankenstein. This is the other problem. The creature has this weird intellectually sexual relationship with his creature. He's his father, but he also wants to be him, and he wants to impress him, and he's jealous of him, and he's going to murder Elizabeth. And there's a great deal of very conflicting stuff going on in there. It's all tangled up, but it's not just right out there the way that Dracula is. Dracula's got brides, and he drinks from Mina. We all know what this is about. Oh yeah. Dracula's a rapist. We get that. Frankenstein's sex life and the creature's sex life are more confused. Even Victor Frankenstein, has a very odd relationship with Elizabeth. It's like, we played together as children, so we were promised to be married to each other, and I'll get around to it, when I'm not hanging around with Henry in an attic touching dead bodies. Victor's got a lot of stuff going on with him, and I think you could probably read into the text a lot of Mary Shelley's concern about sexuality. I mean, she had a kid by this point, who is not in the best of health. Having the child was very traumatic to her. Her mother died in childbirth. She has a lot of issues around childbirth and sexuality that are probably present in the novel as well, and are not as sort of overt as I'm Bram Stoker and ladies are for gazing at, and that's very obvious, right? You can. I work in theater, for God's sake. My whole life is about looking at Ellen Terry and getting hot. That's totally understandable to us in a way that the sort of very intimate sexuality and thoughts on child rearing that Mary brings to the novel, and then puts into the weird gothic young Werther-y homoerotic stuff between the creature and Frankenstein, between Frankenstein and Clerval, those are not accessible in the same way, I think.
Something you brought up about like mistaking the creature and saying Frankenstein when you say the creature. Can't we just say Frankenstein? I mean,
I would love to.
His father was Victor Frankenstein. I mean, people say
right.
Dr. Frankenstein.
Right. He refused. So he just says, "Please, my father was Dr. Frankenstein. Just call me Frankenstein."
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen the thing on the internet that someone took a screenshot of the last page of the novel, yes. And then they wrote right below it, it's like, "But before his boat disappeared in the mists, I could hear him say, 'It's all right if you call me Frankenstein. I don't mind.'" But of course, the refusal of his creator to name him is one of the driving elements of the novel. So certainly. When Victor doesn't even give him the name Adam, which is sort of his self-suggested name as the first of a species, he takes that very personally, that he's being erased as a being, and then responds murderously, because that's what reading Rousseau does for you, I guess. I think we can call him Frankenstein, just you and us friends. Sure. And I certainly don't jump down anyone's throat if they refer to the creature as Frankenstein, because I know what they mean, and it's so much faster than saying the creature or Frankenstein's creature or even the monster like they do in the movie.
Is there any besides the Universal picture? Would you say that there's any and the book, Universal picture book? What Frankenstein is out there that's worth watching?
I mean, the Peter Cushing Frankensteins are fun.
Oh yeah.
I love them, but I don't consider them iconic, even in the same way that I consider Cushing's Van Helsing iconic, or even his Sherlock Holmes, the one time he played him. I mean, he did a magnificent job with that, but I look at him as, first of all, he's too old.
Yeah.
I mean, Victor Frankenstein's just an idiot. He's just a young idiot. And that's part of, I mean, and again, that's part of Mary's circle, is she's with all these sort of 20-something idiots, aristocratic poet, and they were certainly very well read and very well spoken, but they were moral idiots, and in the same way Victor is. And so I think that's part of what she's putting, is that the novel is so much about young people who unleash this new thing into the world. And there's a lot of stuff, you can just keep unpacking it forever because it's a great classic novel. But I think that a lot of movies, just like with Romeo and Juliet, by the time you can headline a Romeo and Juliet movie, you're too old to play Romeo or Juliet.
Yeah.
And so that's why, when they cast, when Baz Luhrmann cast Claire Danes and Leo, that was kind of an effective Romeo and Juliet, because they at least sort of looked like teenagers.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Kenneth Branagh, he's annoying enough to be Victor Frankenstein, but he's far too old to be Victor Frankenstein, and he actually sort of, against his own will, sort of brings too much emotional maturity to the part. I thought De Niro did as well as he could with the creature.
Yeah, that's
in
what I
that
was
one.
thinking.
But that was such a sort of it was a very mixed bag of a Frankenstein. I mean, Branagh is a director. He does the Ice Cave of the Alps. I mean, that's some great stuff. But as Frankenstein, do I say this is up there with Karloff? No. Jason Eckert played Frankenstein in the most recent attempt by Universal to relaunch the series, and that was just terrible. Oh, and he's a good actor, but he was just trapped in a terrible role. And then there's a play, a stage Frankenstein, that I think a lot of people have seen, and I saw one where Johnny Lee Miller and Benedict Cumberbatch played Frankenstein and the Monster, and then they reversed roles for the performances. So if you thought, Benedict Cumberbatch should be the monster because he doesn't look like he was made by people, he looks like he was built, then you can wait for the Benedict creature. But you can switch them around, and and they both have sort of that romantic energy, I think, to the part, but it's not a terrific play, I think. And again, it leaves slack things that the whole job of a play is to tighten stuff up, because you can't just sit there and read the whole novel to people. I mean, you should, but you can't.
Yeah. If you were going to cast a movie based off the novel, what would your dream cast and crew be, do you think?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think you almost want to. I mean, the trouble is that so much of the novel. I mean, again, Young Frankenstein may be the other great channel that goes into that river, because now you think if you're going to cast it the way that the novel writes it, it would look silly, because you'd have 20-somethings building Frankenstein, and that would begin to look weird. I mean, you could sort of, I think Joel Schumacher, back when he was good, Flatliners era Joel Schumacher, I think he could have brought the sort of just manic idiocy to the direction that the novel needs. And then, just whoever, back in the day, Kiefer Sutherland would have made a great Victor. But now, you just find whoever the young punk that the kids love on the CW is, and make them Victor. I mean, Victor is sort of I don't want to say he's a cipher, but if you made someone who has like got genuine charisma, genuine, screen presence, Victor, then they're not going to be terrified of their monster. No. And in fairness of their girlfriend and their everything else that Victor is. So, I mean, I think a lot of it is just, you have to build the monster to look imposing and alien and foreign. I mean, one of the things that I think people don't think about a lot is that the monster is explicitly described as yellow in the novel. And that's not just because Mary Shelley thinks dead bodies are yellow. That's because, according to Francis Galton, who is related somehow to her or is connected somehow to that family, he was proposing the theory of human races and racial superiority at that time. And the yellow Asian people were going to overwhelm the white race, according to Galton and the theory of eugenics that he is formulating basically as she's writing this novel. And her casting the monster as ethnically different from the characters is an intentional choice, that this is what's going to sweep away this corrupt old order, is this new order of mankind. But I am 1,000% sure you cannot do a Frankenstein with a racial angle to it now. Yeah. People would pillory you in the streets, right? And even though you might say, well, I think Idris Elba would make a great monster, if you cast Idris Elba and a bunch of white people building Idris Elba, you are in grave trouble, and I, for one, I'm not going to rescue you.
Yeah.
and so when you look at something that's written in 1818, it's going to be a different book than you have right now. I mean, at least Dracula was Hungarian, and they cast a Hungarian for Dracula. Everything worked out great, but could you cast a 9-foot Chinese person as Frankenstein now? I'll bet you couldn't.
No.
Whoever is the second heir to Chow Yun-Fat's lineage in action cinema in China. And a Frankenstein, actually, that would be kind of fun, is you cast a Frankenstein who is legitimately better at everything than you, because that's how you built him. You didn't build, shambly Boris Karloff. You built Captain America, except he's a 7-foot tall Chinese guy.
Now I want Hong Kong 90s Frankenstein so bad, on wires with guns blazing and doves and
Yep. And John Woo also has that emotional energy that you could probably do with it. I mean, so many possible things. And Junji Ito, of course, even wrote the manga, so you could go find that in your alternate history film world. That's what you do, is you get Junji Ito's manga adapted by a Hong Kong director or something.
Because what I was kicking around in my head a little bit ago is like young dumb people being Frank, and I was like, ooh, Richard Linklater, Austin in the late 80s, like maybe with some members of the Butthole Surfers.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, again, there's that sort of, young idiots out of their depth feel that the novel is, and you find a cinema that does that, and I guess that's why I flash back to Flatliners, because that same, I mean, it's Schumacher, it's not indie cinema, but it's that same era. I think that you could build all manner of fun things with it. But I mean, one of the great things about Frankenstein is you can do so much just with the core concept. I mean, whether you do it well or you do it badly, you can take Frankenstein's sort of role in all the Monster Mash movies, the Universal ones, and then in Monster Squad.
Mm-hmm.
He becomes an interesting character in that way. And again, in Monster Squad, Frankenstein begins as Dracula's enforcer, but he winds up, because he's, as to some extent in the novel, and also you have to read it in the movie, but in the novel, he's this sort of open moral book, and if you write something into him, that's what happens. And because the little girl befriends him, he saves the day at the end of Monster Squad, and that's something you can't do with Dracula, or you can't do it without ruining Dracula.
Yeah.
But because Frankenstein is presented as this moral blank slate, you can make things like that work in a way. And I think that that's one of the very interesting things about him as a creature that you don't get with, the Gill Man or whatever. I mean, you could be sympathy for the Gill. Oh, I'm sad that your environment was destroyed, Gill Man. That's too bad. But, seeing him as a character that you actually have some sort of moral connection with. I mean, maybe Shape of Water, but that's just, hey, let's have sex with the Gill Man and be mad at the government. I mean, fine, but he's not really an actor in that story either. He's a piece of stage scenery. Whereas Frankenstein is a moral actor, and that's part of the point of both the novels and in a sort of a pitying sense in the sense of the movie as well.
Earlier, you were talked about the outlet that is of the River of Frankenstein, that is Young Frankenstein, and something that I was going through when I was looking at photos of Frankenstein to use for this episode and other episodes. I kept running across like Boris Karloff, and then like Herman Munster right next to him.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it kept popping up in my head, Frankenstein, and then I'd see all these, like, comedic versions of Frankenstein, like, whether it be, like, Groovy Ghoulies, or Frankenberry, Herman Munster, Peter Doyle as Frankenstein and Young Frankenstein. I think that was Peter Doyle, right? I don't know.
Peter Boyle, yeah.
Yeah, Boyle. And anyway, it's just, why does Frankenstein... It's like, as we're talking about Frankenstein and everything about Frankenstein, why does Frankenstein lead to such humanity and also such comedy and tragedy? And then it's like... I don't know.
I mean, I think a lot of it is just that great makeup job.
Yeah.
I mean, that the Jack Pierce's design is, I mean, literally, it's iconic.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people accomplish that in their lives. And so you can put bolts on someone's neck or a scar across them, and and give them a bowl haircut, and now they're Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And you can do that with the Munsters, and you can do it with with your Frankenberry cereal, whatever it happens to be. It's recognizable. And so once you have a symbol, you can do parodies and travesties of that symbol, obviously, more easily than you can something people don't recognize. I mean, it would be fun where there was cereal based on Mr. Sardonicus, but you'd have to explain the joke first.
What do you think the takeaway for Frankenstein should be? If someone reads or listens to Frankenstein, what should they get out of it?
I mean, first of all, it's a legitimate work of literature. You're not going to get one thing out of it. I think one of the things to get out of it is this is a novel about philosophy. It's a novel about, like we were talking about at the top of the segment, it's a novel about ethics. It's science, and in that way, it's the best of science fiction in that it posits a technological change. In this case, building people out of corpses, creepy. But then it asks, what does that do to us? What does that do to us as people, and what does it do to society, and what implications, what shadow does that cast back on our current society? And again, I make fun of the novel a little bit for having that sort of romantic, naive Rousseauian approach, but at least it's thinking about something, and it's asking questions and trying to answer them. And when you read the novel, the fact of the matter is, Mary Shelley says, maybe if we followed my philosophy to the letter, there could be a disaster. Because he reads her philosophy. He reads Rousseau. He is creating life without God. And guess what? That just kills a bunch of people and causes a horror, a persecuting horror. And she's a good atheist. She's a good Rousseauian, but she's also, I think, against her will, mature enough to say, there's not one answer. The novel is about the question. The answer, like the protagonist, disappears into the mist of the Arctic, and you have to sort of figure out what's going on.
I like it. I like Frankenstein.
And the thing is, it's kind of, because, I mean, for God's sake, she was 18. It's not a great novel in the same sense, even that Dracula is, much less, I don't know, Pride and Prejudice or War and Peace or something. But it is so full of ideas and concepts and fecundity and potential And it's so deep because she was so smart and so well read and just give as good as she gets in a conversation. One of my favorite Mary Shelley stories, which I will just tell apropos of nothing, Burr, believe it or not, when he was in exile in England after that little contretemps was shooting Alexander Hamilton, one of the few places that he could go socially was the house of her father, William Godwin, because he was a radical and could be seen with an American Republican without destroying himself in society, because he was already destroyed in society. He was a weirdo. And so Aaron Burr used to go over to the house and he would look forward to talking politics with Mary Shelley. And she's like 13, 14. And he says, and she would brew this incredibly strong tea that would keep us up all night talking politics. And Aaron Burr is, he's seen and done it all. He's a very bright guy, lawyer, governmental theorist, the whole 9 yards. And this 14-year-old girl is basically trading him shot for shot. That's pretty impressive. And so when she writes Frankenstein, no, it's not a perfection of craft. Yes, it sprawls all over the place. Yeah, there's sort of slack bits where Mary Shelley's ideas are outrunning her ability to craft a story. But at the end of the day, we're talking about Frankenstein, and I guarantee you in 200 years, no one's going to be talking about anything we did.
No.
Right?
So if someone likes Frankenstein, and if someone likes this style of gothic horror, what would you recommend that they also read? Like any other gems out there that you think are like maybe not as well known?
The trouble is that even Mary Shelley doesn't really come back. And I mean, all her other novels, and I've tried The Last Man, I've tried a couple of the other things she's written. They have, they're more ship shape, but they have less, I think, less juice in them. And other novels of that era, like Varney the Vampire, are just pot boilers. They just keep, dropping stuff on, while you wait. I think that there's a novel called Manuscript Found in Saragossa, which is probably of the same era. And it certainly presents itself as part of that same era, and is got a lot of that same invention and gothic and tale within a tale. And if what you liked was the fact that we're doing story within a story, the structure of Frankenstein, I think Manuscript Found in Saragossa is one that not a lot of people glom onto. And that's like a drunken Arabian Night is what that is. That's like someone read Vathek and said, oh no, I can make it crazier. And that's written by Jan Pataki, and he died like 3 years before Frankenstein came out. So it's again a little bit before that era, but it's that same sort of gothic sensibility and that same sort of crazed invention of stuff going on. I think that another possible place that you might go from that is, again, if you really liked that sort of louder than bombs gothic sensibility, obviously Melmoth the Wanderer is a classic, and because it's kind of picaresque. If you get bored with Melmoth the Wanderer, you can skip ahead or stop, and you're basically getting the same story.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying everyone should run out and read Melmoth the Wanderer. I think this is very much, if you discovered a taste in yourself for the epistolary Gothic, for the nested Gothic, Melmoth the Wanderer will feed that taste. I do want to get back to the Gothic, into the world of Frankenstein, and to the sort of the questions asked about. I mean, the whole question that I think that one of the things that is maybe raised more by the later works than by the original is, the whole question of body horror.
Yeah.
Is what happens with a body part that is animated by something not human? And what if it's your body part? And that's more Hands of Warlock type stuff, really, than it is Frankenstein, but it's part of that allied conjuries of fears. And certainly people who read Frankenstein now will be reading that into it. And I think that there's so much stuff that you can do with that. I've got a couple of projects, either one of which would be interesting. And if I ever do them, I'll certainly let you know.
Okay. Do you have anything that you want to let us know? Any projects coming up and coming out that you want to let us know about?
Well, I mean, as always, Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff, my podcast.
Good podcast.
With Robin Laws. Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff.com drops every Friday. I will, in the near future, but I don't have a date yet, be launching a game about the Hellenistic era, which is, I believe I mentioned previously on a related podcast of yours. So on an earlier iteration of the podcast, I mentioned Hellenistica, which is a game for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. It's a setting set in the Hellenistic era.
Nice.
We'll be dropping a launch for that.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for being on the show again and talking Frankenstein with us. I'm sure we'll have you back on sometime soon to talk something, because
Right.
you're such a well of knowledge.
Let's stick with well. Could be any kind of a tube containing stuff of knowledge.
You're quite the receptacle, Ken.
Exactly. Quite the sump of knowledge. That's me.
Well, thank you again so much, Ken.
All right, man. No, thanks a lot. I'm always happy to come on.
Thank you. Thank you once again for listening to Black Clock Audio Tales. I've been your host, DB Spitzer. Join us next time when we have someone on to talk about some sort of literature dealing with horror, folklore, the supernatural, anything like that. And also remember, every last Tuesday of the month we have People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. If you want to suggest stories to be read, you can contact us at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And you can also just go to pgttcm.com, and we've got a contact sheet there. We'll definitely check that out. All right, thank you, and you can always give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. Why not check out, I don't know, our Threadless page at threadless.pgttcm.com, or no, it's pgttcm.threadless.com. And of course, hey, stay beautiful, and remember, this is recorded at Badger's Drift Studio in beautiful North Portland. I love you all, babies. Kisses. Oh, no, same podcast.
Yeah, same podcast. I didn't know if this was Black Clock or if this was People's Guide or if this is some third.
Oh, no, this is Black Clock. Anytime I ask you about lit stuff, it's Black Clock.
It's Black Clock. All right.